The lawyer's office was quiet, except for the sound of papers being slid across mahogany. The envelope landed softly in front of him, but it felt like a gunshot. Robert stared at the return address, his own house, and something in his chest collapsed. The receptionist didn't look up from her screen. In the waiting room behind him, two other clients sat pretending they hadn't watched a man's face change from confusion to recognition to something darker. His hands were steady as he opened it, but his breathing wasn't. Before we continue, please like and subscribe to help push this story to more viewers who might benefit from this story. And comment where you're watching from. 2 months earlier, Robert sat in his kitchen on a Tuesday morning, steam rising from his coffee, watching his wife Tanya move through their routine with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. She was a pharmaceutical rep for a company called Meridian, and she was good at it, the kind of good that meant promotions, bonuses, travel. Robert taught history at Jefferson High. He made $53,000 a year, which was respectable, which was steady, which meant he was the one home most evenings doing the grading while Tanya climbed. He didn't resent it. He wasn't the type. She'd come home after these trips, electric with stories about clients, about deals, about the weight of being one of the few black women at director level at her firm. He'd listen with genuine pride, make her dinner, ask the right questions. Their marriage had the shape of something real. They'd been together 9 years, married for 6. No kids, but they'd talked about it. The house in Drexel Hills was theirs now. The renovated kitchen from last summer still smelled faintly of new paint. Tanya had been working harder lately. Not unhappy exactly, but stretched thin. She'd been bringing her laptop to bed, checking her phone during dinner. The promotions had been coming steadily, coordinator to account manager to senior account manager, each one coming with longer hours and more travel. Robert noticed that her supervisor, a man named Harold Clemens who was in his mid-40s, seemed to have taken a particular interest in her development. Tanya mentioned his name more and more. Harold thinks I'm ready for the next level. Harold says I have the strategic mind for director work. Harold suggested I lead the quarterly presentation. Robert had met Harold twice. Once at a company holiday party where he'd shaken Robert's hand with the kind of firm grip that was supposed to mean something about character. Harold was tall, fit, wore expensive watches. He'd made partner at 40, which Tanya said was remarkable. He'd been with Meridian for 12 years. He had an MBA from a school Robert had heard of, but couldn't afford. Harold was the kind of man who looked like success and talked like it and wore it in the cut of his clothes. Robert didn't dislike him. He was grateful, actually. Tanya needed someone who saw her potential. Robert saw her potential too, but he was her husband, so his opinion didn't count the same way. A mentor's opinion had weight. A supervisor's opinion changed careers. The trip to Miami came up casually. Tanya mentioned it in early November while she was doing dishes. There was a pharmaceutical conference at a resort in South Beach. 3 days, Tuesday to Thursday. Most of the Meridian team would be there. She'd be giving a presentation on Wednesday about digital marketing strategies in the opioid space, which was important work. The company was taking it seriously. Harold would be there, of course. Most of her department would be. Robert nodded and filed it away. These trips happened several times a year. They were part of the job. Tanya traveled for conferences and client meetings and strategic planning sessions. Robert had learned not to worry. She was responsible. She was careful. She was building something. On a Thursday morning in late November, while Tanya was still in Miami, Robert's phone rang. It was his mother calling from Savannah, her voice carrying that particular excitement she got when she had news. "Your Aunt Helen called," his mother said. "She's been cleaning out her house, and she found something. An old envelope. She's been putting cash in it for years. For your birthday. For all her nieces and nephews, actually, but she found yours." "Found it?" Robert asked. She'd filled it up over years and stuck in the closet. "She's 91 now. She doesn't need it. She wants you to have it." There was a pause while Robert processed this. "It's $4,000, his mother said. Robert sat down. $4,000. Money that had appeared from nowhere, from the accumulation of small sacrifices made by an elderly woman for people she loved. It felt like a miracle. It felt like a sign. It felt like the universe handing him an opportunity to do something he'd been thinking about but hadn't acted on. He thought about Tanya, about how stretched she was. about how the travel was starting to feel less like adventure and more like obligation, about how when she came home, she was often tired, checking her phone, thinking about work, even when they were together. When was the last time he'd surprised her with something that said, "I'm thinking about you," in the way that matters? He spent Thursday afternoon on his work computer during lunch, researching flights to Miami. There was a Friday evening flight departing Atlanta at 5:15 p.m., arriving in Miami at 8:47 p.m. The round trip was $412. He could do that. He had the money. More than that, he had the reason. The hotel she was staying at was called the Ocean View Resort. He found it online. Sleek, modern, the kind of place that catered to business travelers. He found a restaurant she'd mentioned once. She'd seen it on Instagram and talked about wanting to try it. Azure. Seafood. Upscale. He made a reservation for two at 8:30 p.m. Saturday evening. He ordered flowers. 24 roses from a Miami florist. The kind of gesture that wasn't original but was clear in its meaning. Robert told his principal he had a family emergency and needed Friday afternoon off. He packed an overnight bag with his good jeans and a shirt without wrinkles. He packed cologne. He imagined Tanya's face when she opened that hotel room door. The surprise. The moment when she'd understand that someone was thinking about her in that way. That she mattered enough for spontaneity. That their marriage was the kind of thing worth making an effort for. The flight left on time. The cabin was mostly empty on that Friday afternoon. Robert graded papers and thought about his marriage. They'd met at a mutual friend's barbecue 7 years ago. Tanya had been working entry-level sales back then, driving all over Georgia pitching cholesterol medications to doctors. Robert had just started teaching. They'd bonded over both having demanding jobs that didn't pay well and dreams about places they couldn't yet afford. Their first date had been miniature golf, and Tanya had won by 6 strokes and had reminded him about it every few months for years. She was competitive, ambitious, driven. Those were qualities he loved about her because they made him want to be better, to take more risks, to not settle for comfortable mediocrity. They'd married 5 years ago at a winery in North Georgia. 75 people, a string quartet, vows they'd written themselves. Tanya had promised to choose him every day. Robert had promised to support her dreams. For 5 years, those promises had felt like something real. The plane touched down right on schedule. Robert collected his bag and moved through the airport feeling electric with anticipation. The November evening in Miami was warm and humid, a stark change from Atlanta's cool autumn air. He caught an Uber driven by a chatty man named Roberto who spent the entire drive recommending Cuban restaurants and salsa clubs. The Ocean View Resort was exactly what it had looked like in photos. Modern architecture, tall palms swaying, a circular driveway where valets in white uniforms rushed to assist guests emerging from luxury cars. The lobby was all marble and contemporary art and a massive chandelier made of blown glass. Robert approached the front desk feeling out of place in his khakis and polo shirt among all the business people in expensive suits. The young woman behind the counter smiled professionally. "Checking in, sir?" "Actually," Robert said, pulling out his phone to show their wedding photo, "my wife is staying here. Tanya Williams. Room 912. I'd like to surprise her." The woman's fingers moved across the keyboard. Her eyes stayed on the screen for longer than seemed necessary. When she looked back at Robert, something had shifted in her expression. It was subtle, just a flicker, but it was there. "I see Mrs. Williams checked in on Tuesday," she said carefully, enunciating each word as if she were choosing them deliberately. "But, sir, I need to let you know something. There's another guest on that reservation." The world tilted slightly. "Another guest?" The woman glanced to her left and right, then leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "A Mr. Harold Clemens. He checked in yesterday afternoon. The room is registered under your wife's corporate card, but the reservation was made for 2 people. Robert's mouth went dry. "They're sharing a room?" he asked, though the answer was already forming in his mind. "Yes, sir," the woman said, and her voice had shifted into something that might have been pity. Robert didn't remember walking away from the desk. He didn't remember moving through the lobby. But suddenly he was sitting in a low-back chair near the bar area, watching couples laugh, watching business associates shake hands, watching the ordinary movements of people whose lives hadn't just tilted on an axis. There had to be an explanation. There had to be. Tanya and Harold shared a room for work reasons. They were reviewing a presentation. They were working on a client pitch. There was some professional reason that made sense if he just waited long enough to hear it. Robert sat there for 30 minutes. He ordered a drink he didn't want and didn't touch. He watched people come and go through the lobby entrance. Families with children, couples holding hands, groups of young women in matching conference badges, laughing about something that had happened that day. The world was continuing normally. People were living their ordinary lives. No one else knew that something was breaking. He called the front desk from his phone, 30 feet away. A different receptionist answered. "Can you connect me to room 912? He asked. "Of course, sir." One moment. The phone rang 4 times and went to the room's voicemail. Tanya's voice, professional and bright. She wasn't there, or she wasn't answering. Robert hung up without leaving a message. He waited until 7:15 p.m., then rode the elevator up to the 9th floor. The hallway was quiet, carpeted in deep burgundy, lined with abstract art prints that probably cost thousands of dollars. Room 912 was 3/4 of the way down on the left side. Robert stood outside the door with the roses in his hand, which now felt absurd, grotesque even. He held them aside. He didn't knock. He listened. For a moment there was nothing, just the ambient noise of a hotel, the hum of an ice machine somewhere down the hall, the faint sound of television from another room, the air conditioning cycling. Then he heard her laugh. Tanya's laugh. The specific laugh she made when she was relaxed. The one she used to make more often in the early years of their marriage. The one she made when she was happy. A man's voice responded. Lower. Robert couldn't make out the words. And then came the sounds that would replay in his head for weeks afterward. The creaking of the bed. Tanya's voice shifting from laughter to something else. Breathing that was no longer casual. The distinct sounds of 2 people becoming intimate. Tanya's voice, unmistakable, saying yes. Robert's knees went weak. His vision narrowed. The roses dropped from his hand onto the plush carpet, and he watched them fall as if he were watching something happen to someone else. He stood there. He didn't know for how long. 5 minutes. 10. Time had become elastic and unreliable. Part of him wanted to bang on that door, to burst in, to force them to face what they were doing, to make them see his face and understand the damage they were causing in real time. But a larger part of him, the part trained in history, in understanding how power shifts and conflicts resolve, in teaching young people that the most effective movements aren't always the loudest ones, told him to wait, to think, to plan. If he went in there now, Tanya would cry. Harold would apologize. They'd both make excuses. They'd find a way to make Robert the bad guy, the jealous husband, the insecure man who couldn't handle his wife's success. The story would become about his reaction, not their betrayal. No, Robert needed something different. He needed leverage. He needed evidence. He needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before he made any moves. He picked up the roses from the carpet and walked back to the elevator with them still in his hand. In the lobby, he approached the desk again. The original receptionist was still there. "I need a room for the night," Robert said, keeping his voice steady. "Do you have anything available?" The woman looked relieved that he wasn't making a scene. "Of course, Mr. Williams. We have a standard room available for $279 per night." Robert paid with his credit card, the joint account card, which would mean Tanya would see this charge someday, which felt like a small, accurate detail in what was becoming a much larger truth. He took the key card and went to room 623, 6 floors down from his wife and her lover. The room was generic and clean. King bed with pressed white sheets, a view of the ocean, a mini bar that he stared at for a long time before deciding against it. Robert sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone. His first instinct was to call her, to scream, to demand answers, to make her listen to what he'd heard. Instead, he opened his phone's camera app and began documenting things. He photographed his airline ticket showing the arrival time. He photographed the parking garage where his Uber had dropped him. He photographed the lobby. He photographed the hallway on the 9th floor from a distance, so the room number wasn't visible, but the context was clear. Then he opened his notes app and began writing down every detail he could remember. The sounds he'd heard through the door, The exact moment they'd started, what time it was. The way the woman at the front desk had delivered the information about Harold checking in. The room number, the name on the reservation, the date, the time, everything. Robert didn't sleep that night. He lay on the bed in a hotel room in Miami, in a city that suddenly felt hostile and foreign, and he listened to the sound of traffic outside and his own heartbeat in his ears. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard those sounds from room 912. Every time he started to drift off, he jerked awake with his pulse racing. He ordered room service at midnight, a burger he didn't eat, and spent hours on his phone researching. He looked up Georgia divorce law. He learned that while Georgia had moved toward no-fault divorce, adultery could still affect property division and alimony. He read articles about infidelity and betrayal, and how to protect yourself financially when a marriage ends. He researched Harold Clements. LinkedIn showed an impressive resume. Wharton MBA, 12 years at Meridian Pharmaceutical. A steady climb up the corporate ladder. In his profile photo, Harold looked confident and successful in an expensive suit that probably cost more than Robert's monthly car payment. By 3 in the morning, Robert had made decisions. He wasn't going to confront Tanya in Miami. He wasn't going to give her any warning that he knew. He was going to fly back to Atlanta on Friday morning as planned. And he was going to spend the weekend gathering information, understanding the full scope of the betrayal, and planning his response. Because Robert understood something that Tanya and Harold didn't yet know. In any conflict, the person with the best information and the most patience usually wins. Friday morning, Robert took an Uber back to the airport. He flew home to Atlanta, landing just after noon. He drove to their house in Drexel Hills, the house they bought together 3 years ago with a mortgage that still felt impossibly large. The house where they'd hosted dinner parties and Christmas mornings and lazy Sunday brunches and made love and planned a future that now felt like a fiction. He walked through the rooms, seeing everything differently now. The framed photos on the walls, their wedding day, a vacation to Asheville, Tanya at a promotion party, now looked like propaganda. The kitchen where they'd cooked together last spring, choosing tile and arguing playfully about cabinet hardware. The bedroom where they'd made love. All of it was tainted now, corrupted by the knowledge of what had happened in room 912. He went to Tanya's home office, a converted spare bedroom with built-in shelves and an expensive ergonomic chair. She kept everything meticulously organized. Color-coded file folders, label binders, a large wall calendar marking her schedule in neat handwriting. Robert photographed everything. The calendar showed a pattern he hadn't noticed before. Multiple entries over the past 8 months. Conference Miami. Client meeting Chicago. Workshop New Orleans. How many of those trips had actually been about work? How many had been cover stories from meeting Harold? In her desk drawer, under insurance documents and old tax returns, Robert found a note written on expensive cream-colored stationery. The handwriting wasn't Tanya's. It was older, more careful. V. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. I know we have to be careful, but God, I wish I could wake up next to you every morning. Same time next month. We could try that place you mentioned. H. V. Harold sometimes called her V, a nickname for her middle name, Vivian. Robert had never heard him use it. The note was dated July. That meant they'd been doing this for at least 4 months. Probably longer. Robert photographed the note from multiple angles, careful to capture the handwriting, the date, every damning detail. Then he placed it back exactly where he'd found it. He spent the rest of Friday afternoon going through old credit card statements from their joint account. Once he knew what he was looking for, the pattern became obvious. Charges at restaurants he'd never been to. Florist deliveries he'd never received. Hotels in cities where Tanya had supposedly been at conferences, but where the dates didn't quite match up with what she told him. Robert also found something else. In a folder marked benefits, there was paperwork about Tanya's life insurance policy through work. She'd recently increased it from $100,000 to $500,000. The paperwork was dated 6 weeks ago. Robert was still listed as the beneficiary. Was it just standard corporate benefits during open enrollment? Or was something else happening? Robert immediately dismissed the thought as paranoid. Tanya wasn't a murderer. She was just a cheater. By Friday evening, Robert knew he needed professional help. He pulled up his contacts and found James Morrison, his old college roommate who now worked as a private investigator based in Birmingham. They'd stayed close over the years, meeting up several times annually for drinks and Hawks games. Robert called him. James answered on the second ring, sounding cheerful. "Robert, what's going on, man? You coming to Birmingham soon?" "We need to. I need your professional help," Robert interrupted. "And I need this to stay completely confidential." James's tone changed immediately, becoming serious. "Of course. What's happening?" Robert explained everything. The surprise trip to Miami. What he'd heard outside room 912. The note he'd found. The pattern of suspicious trips. Harold Clemens's name appearing more and more frequently. Everything. When he finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Jesus, Robert," James said quietly. "I'm so sorry, man. That's really rough." "I need information," Robert said. "I need to know if this is just an affair or if there's more to it. I need to know about Harold Clemens. His background. Whether he's done this before. I need to know what the company knows. And I need documentation that would hold up legally if it came to that." "Absolutely," James said without hesitation. "I'll start tomorrow." "But Robert, are you sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes knowing more just makes the pain worse." "I can't move forward until I understand," Robert said. "I need to know everything." "Okay," James agreed. "Give me about a week. I'll be thorough. And Robert, I'm really sorry, brother. You didn't deserve this." Saturday afternoon, Tanya came home from the airport. Robert picked her up from the arrivals curb at Hartsfield-Jackson just as she emerged with her rolling suitcase. She looked beautiful in a navy blazer and designer jeans, but she also looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. "Hey, baby," she called out, waving. She came over and kissed him, and Robert tasted something he'd never tasted before on her lips. Betrayal. "God, it's good to be home. I missed you so much." "Missed you too," Robert said, taking her suitcase and loading it into the trunk of his Honda. "How was the flight?" "Exhausting," she said, sliding into the passenger seat. "Turbulence over the Gulf, and I sat next to this guy who wouldn't stop talking about cryptocurrency." She immediately checked her phone, a habit he was noticing more and more. "How was your week?" she asked. "Quiet," Robert said, pulling away from the curb. "Just work and grading papers. Nothing exciting." In the car, Tanya talked animatedly about the conference, the keynote speakers, the breakout sessions on digital marketing strategies, the networking dinner on the final night. She had details prepared, anecdotes ready. She was a practiced liar, Robert realized, comfortable with deception. If he hadn't been in Miami, if he hadn't heard what he'd heard, he would have believed every word. "Oh, and I have amazing news," Tanya said as they merged onto I-85 toward Drexel Hills. "Harold told me on the flight back he thinks I'm ready for that senior director position. It would mean a bump to about $125,000 base, plus better bonuses and more stock options. We could finally think about moving to a bigger house. Something in Brookhaven or Virginia Highland. For bedrooms. A real backyard. Maybe even start thinking about kids for real." Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Harold's been really supportive of your career," Robert said. "He really has," Tanya agreed, smiling. "He's been such a great mentor. He sees potential in me that I didn't even see in myself. I feel so lucky to have him as a boss." They arrived home, and Robert helped carry Tanya's luggage inside. She immediately headed for the bedroom to unpack while Robert went to the kitchen and opened a bottle of wine. A Pinot Noir from Oregon, Tanya's favorite. He poured 2 glasses, his hands steady despite the storm raging inside him. That evening, they had dinner together like a normal couple. They drank the wine. They sat on the couch and watched an episode of the cooking show Tanya liked. She fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, and Robert sat there for an hour, barely breathing, his arm around a woman who was now essentially a stranger to him. Sunday, Tanya spent most of the day in her home office catching up on emails and preparing for Monday's meetings. Robert went for a long run through their neighborhood, needing to think, needing to process everything. The November air was cool and crisp, and the physical exertion helped clear his head. By the time he returned home, sweaty and exhausted, he made several decisions about how to proceed. There was a text from James waiting for him. The message read, Initial findings are very interesting. A lot more here than just a simple affair. Can we talk Monday evening? I'll have a preliminary report ready. Robert deleted the text immediately. He was being careful now about all his communications, all his actions, all his reactions. He couldn't afford to leave any evidence that Tanya might stumble across. He needed to maintain his cover as the trusting husband while he built his case in the background. That Sunday evening, as they prepared dinner together, grilled chicken and a salad, falling into their comfortable domestic routine, Robert watched Tanya carefully. She seemed relaxed, happy even. She hummed while she chopped vegetables. She told him about a funny meme one of her co-workers had sent. She made plans for them to see a movie next weekend. She felt no guilt, Robert realized. Or if she did, she'd learned to compartmentalize it so completely that it didn't affect her day-to-day behavior. She could spend 3 days in a hotel room with her boss, then come home and seamlessly resume being a loving wife. The cognitive dissonance was stunning. They went to bed at 10:30, and Tanya curled up next to him like always. "I love you," she murmured sleepily. "I'm glad we have this. Some of my co-workers have such messy relationships, so much drama. I'm grateful we have something solid." "Me too," Robert whispered into the darkness, and he wondered if Tanya could hear the hollow ring in his voice. He lay awake long after she'd fallen asleep, listening to her breathing, feeling the weight of her body against his side. This was his wife. They'd stood in front of 75 people and promised to be faithful, to cherish each other, to build a life together. Those vows had meant everything to Robert. He'd taken them seriously, lived by them, never even been tempted to break them. Apparently, they'd meant nothing to Tanya. By Monday morning, Donald had his emotions firmly under control again. He woke up, made coffee, watched Tanya get ready for work like he'd done 1,000 times before. She was humming softly as she applied her makeup, checking her phone every few minutes. Robert noticed she smiled at certain messages, typed quick responses, then set her phone face down on the bathroom counter. Probably texting Harold, probably planning their next meeting, making sure their stories aligned about the Miami conference. "Big day?" Robert asked, keeping his tone light. "Just the usual chaos," Tanya replied, applying lipstick. "Harold wants to debrief about Miami, and we've got a major client presentation this afternoon. I'll probably be home late." "Sorry." "No problem," Robert said. "I've got a ton of essays to grade anyway." Tanya kissed him goodbye, a quick distracted peck, grabbed her coffee thermos and leather bag, and headed out the door. Through the kitchen window, Robert watched her BMW pull out of the driveway and disappear down the tree-lined street. The moment she was gone, Robert pulled out his phone and opened a new note file. He titled it Evidence Log and began methodically documenting everything he knew so far. Every lie Glenda had told, every suspicious charge on their credit cards, every detail from Miami, every message and call that seemed suspicious in retrospect. He was building a case, and by the time he was done, Tanya and Harold would understand that betrayal doesn't happen in a vacuum. Actions have consequences. At school, Robert taught his first period American history class about the Reconstruction era. They discussed how the South attempted to evade the consequences of losing the Civil War through black codes and Jim Crow laws. His students, a mix of juniors and seniors, debated whether true reconciliation was possible without accountability. A student named Marcus raised his hand. "Do you think people can change if they never face consequences for what they did?" Robert thought about Tanya, about Harold, about all the lies and betrayals. "No," Robert said finally. "I think consequences are what force us to confront our actions and decide who we want to be. Without consequences, why would anyone change?" He had no idea how prophetic those words would become. At 4:30 p.m., Robert left school and drove to a Starbucks in Midtown, far enough from both their neighborhood and Tanya's office that there was zero chance of accidentally running into her or anyone who knew them. James Morrison was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a laptop, a manila envelope, and 2 cups of coffee. "Got you a dark roast," James said as Robert slid into the booth. They shook hands, and Robert was grateful for the solid grip, the genuine sympathy in his friend's eyes. "How are you holding up?" James asked. "I'm functional," Robert said. "Tell me what you found." James opened his laptop. "Harold Clemens. Age 48. Married for 18 years to Rebecca Clemens. She's a graphic designer, works from home. They have 3 kids, twins who are 15 and a daughter who's 12. They live in a $750,000 house in Marietta. Harold's salary at Meridian is $185,000 base, another $50,000 or so in bonuses. He drives a leased Mercedes. So he has a lot to lose, Robert said. A significant amount, James confirmed. But there's more. This isn't his first time. James pulled up a photograph and a document. Michelle Davis. She worked under Harold from 2018 to 2020. Marketing coordinator. She left suddenly and signed an NDA as part of her severance. I managed to get her to talk off the record. She described exactly the same pattern. Started as mentorship, became intimate, ended when she wanted out. She took the severance and the NDA and moved back home to Augusta. Never worked in pharmaceutical sales again. He showed another file. Sarah Chun, 2019 to 2021. Same pattern, different location, different NDA. How many? Robert asked. At least 3 that I can confirm, James said. Probably more. Harold's been at Meridian for 15 years, and he's good at what he does. He brings in major clients, which means the company protects him. They'd rather pay off a woman and sign an NDA than lose a revenue generator. Robert felt something cold settle in his chest. And Tanya, he asked. Tanya's in a different position, James said carefully. She's not beneath him in the hierarchy. According to internal emails I was able to access, there's a promotion coming. Senior director. Significant salary jump to around $120,000. Better benefits. Better everything. And Harold's been advocating for her. Hard. Very hard. So he's buying her, Robert said. Or she's accepting what she thinks is part of her career advancement, James said. The line gets blurry when there's a power imbalance like that. They spent 3 hours going through every detail. Hotel receipts under Tanya's corporate card showing 7 trips over the past 8 months where Harold had checked in the same day. Shared rooms sometimes, adjacent rooms other times. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts, many late at night. A timeline of Tanya's rapid advancement that corresponded exactly with when she'd begun reporting directly to Harold. What would you do? Robert asked finally. James leaned back, considering. I'd ask myself what I actually want the outcome to be. Do you want her to suffer? Or do you want accountability for what happened? Both, Robert said. Then you've got options, James said. And most of them are messy. You could file for divorce quietly and move on. You could confront them and try to salvage things. Or you could do something bigger. Like what? Robert asked, though he already knew the answer was forming in his mind. Like holding people accountable in a way that prevents them from doing this to anyone else, James said. Robert hired a divorce attorney named Catherine Okafor, who worked out of a law office in Buckhead. Catherine had a law degree from Howard University and the demeanor of a woman who'd seen every variation of human betrayal and had learned not to be surprised by any of it. Robert sat across from her in a chair that cost more than his monthly car payment and told her everything. The trip to Miami, what he'd heard through the door, the note he'd found, the pattern of travel and advancement, the other women, all of it. Catherine listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When Robert finished, she removed her glasses and set them on the desk. You have an exceptionally strong case, she said. Georgia allows fault-based divorce grounds, and adultery is one of them. Given the income disparity and the documentation you have, you could likely retain the majority of marital assets, receive alimony given that she'll have greater earning potential post-promotion, and she'll be on the hook for your legal fees. What's the timeline? Robert asked. If she doesn't contest, which she might not given the evidence, you're looking at 4 to 6 months. More if she fights it. But honestly, most cheating spouses want this over quietly to avoid public embarrassment. Robert was quiet. But you want more than that, Catherine said, reading him. You want him accountable. Both of them. Robert explained about the pattern, about the other women, about Meridian's complicity, about the NDAs that silenced victims. Catherine listened carefully. Legally, she said when he finished, you could contact his wife. That's not slander if it's true, and you have evidence. As for the company, If you can get the other women to break their NDAs and coordinate a lawsuit, you might have a legal claim. But Robert, that's a much longer road. Years potentially. It's public. It's expensive. And it means your marriage becomes a scandal. I want to do it, Robert said. Catherine smiled slightly. I thought you might. Okay, here's what we'll do. For the next 2 weeks, Robert moved through his life as if nothing had changed. He went to work. He taught his classes. He came home and cooked dinner and asked Tanya about her day and listened to her talk about projects and clients and the upcoming gala that Meridian was hosting, which Harold would be attending. During that gala, Robert stayed home and worked the phone. Through James, he reached out to Michelle Davis. She was hesitant at first, but something in Robert's voice, the fact that he wasn't trying to hurt anyone but simply telling the truth, made her listen. She agreed to talk. So did Sarah Chun. So did a third woman Robert hadn't known about, Natasha Cole, who transferred to a different department after things with Harold had ended and who had been silent for 4 years. Robert also reached out to Rebecca Clemens through mutual contact. He didn't mention Tanya. He simply sent her an email with hotel receipts, phone records, and text messages between Harold and her husband, arranged chronologically. He attached a note that was brief and direct. Mrs. Clemens, you deserve to know the truth. What happened next unfolded with the inevitability of dominoes falling in sequence. Rebecca called Harold at work. There was a public argument. Rebecca filed for divorce. Harold's phone became flooded with calls from the company's HR department. On Monday morning of the following week, Robert sat in Catherine's office and watched as she filed the divorce paperwork electronically. The documents were served to Tanya at Meridian's offices at 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, handed to her in the lobby in front of colleagues. Robert knew this because James was watching from the coffee shop across the street. He saw Tanya's face go white. He saw her excuse herself from a conversation with a client. He saw her walk quickly toward the restroom, her composure cracking visibly. Tanya called Robert twice in the next hour. Robert didn't answer. He was in his classroom teaching his second period American history class, discussing the fall of the Roman Empire and how internal corruption destroyed empires more effectively than any external enemy ever could. That same morning, Michelle Davis filed a formal complaint with the EEOC. Sarah Chun and Natasha Cole did the same. Within hours, Meridian's legal department received notice that 3 former employees were breaking their NDAs to pursue a claim of systematic sexual harassment and company complicity. By Wednesday, Harold Clemens was on administrative leave, pending an investigation. By Thursday, the Atlanta Business Journal published a preliminary story. Pharmaceutical executive faces sexual harassment allegations. The story named Harold. It detailed his position and salary. It included anonymous accounts from former employees describing a pattern of inappropriate relationships with subordinates that the company had allegedly covered up. Jennifer Brooks, one of the other women Robert hadn't known about, was quoted by name. I was forced to choose between my career and my integrity. The company made it clear that if I wanted to advance, I needed to accept that certain executives operated by different rules. By Friday, Meridian had opened an internal investigation that would consume 3 months and produce a conclusion that was both devastating and inevitable. Tanya called Robert on Monday evening. He let it ring. She called again. Twice. 3 times. Robert listened to the voicemails while he was grading papers at his kitchen table. First message, Donald, what the hell is going on? I just got divorce papers delivered to my office in front of everyone. The receptionist handed them to me while I was in a meeting with a client. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? Call me back right now. Second message, Robert, seriously, we need to talk about this. I don't understand what's happening. If you're upset about something, we should discuss it like adults, not through lawyers and public humiliation. Please call me. Third message, okay, I'm starting to get really worried. Is this some kind of joke? Did someone hack your email? Please just call me and tell me what's going on. Fourth message, and Robert could hear the panic creeping in. David's been suspended. They suspended him without telling him why. HR pulled him into a meeting, and now he's not answering his phone. Robert, did you do something? Did you? Fifth message, I know. I know you know. I don't know how you found out, but please call me. We need to talk about this. I can explain everything. It's not what you think. Sixth message. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Whatever you think happened, I can explain. It was a mistake. It doesn't mean anything. Please don't throw away 6 years of marriage over this. We can work through it. We can go to counseling. Please just talk to me. Seventh message, and now she was crying. Robert, I'm begging you. Don't do this. Don't destroy everything we built together. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. Please give me a chance to make this right. Please. Robert saved all the messages. More evidence. Then he called her back. She answered on the first ring, her voice desperate. Robert, I know about Harold, he said calmly, cutting off whatever excuse she'd prepared. I know about Miami. I know about all of it. Silence, then in a small voice, how? I was there, Robert said. In Miami. I decided to surprise you on your business trip. I heard you with him through the hotel room door. Room 912. Remember? He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, rapid and panicked. Robert, it's not. It's more complicated than. It's actually very simple, Robert interrupted. You cheated on me with your boss for at least 8 months. You lied to me every single day. You made me feel crazy for noticing you were distant. And you were planning to hide assets and blindside me with a divorce once you got your promotion. I read your text messages with Harold. You discussed timing. You discussed money. You discussed how to manage this. You went through my phone. Tanya's voice shifted from panic to defensive anger. I hired a private investigator, Robert said. Everything I know is documented and legal. The divorce papers you were served are just the beginning, Tanya. Harold's company is investigating him for a pattern of sexual harassment. His wife knows everything and is filing for divorce. And I provided information to journalists about Meridian's toxic culture of protecting powerful men while silencing their victims. You bastard, Tanya hissed. You're trying to destroy my career. Everything I've worked for. I'm trying to hold you accountable, Robert said, his voice still eerily calm. You and Harold made choices. You chose to lie. You chose to cheat. You chose to plot against me. Those choices have consequences. Robert, please, Tanya's voice broke. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. It was a mistake. I'm sorry. I'll end things with Harold immediately. We can save our marriage. I promise. I don't love you anymore, Robert said quietly. Tanya, I don't even know who you are. The woman I married wouldn't have done this. You're a stranger to me now. He hung up before she could respond. By the end of the week, the story had grown beyond just Tanya and Harold. A comprehensive article appeared in the Atlanta Business Journal titled Pharmaceutical Marketing Firm's Culture of Harassment Exposed. It was front-page business news. The journalist, a woman named Krista Price who'd been investigating workplace harassment for years, had done her homework. She'd interviewed 8 former employees. She'd obtained internal company documents showing that HR had received multiple complaints about Harold over the years. She documented how the company had systematically protected him through NDAs and quiet settlements. The article included a photograph of Harold looking confident and successful in an expensive suit. It also included a quote from Robert. My wife's affair with her supervisor destroyed my marriage. But what I discovered in investigating was bigger than just my personal pain. This was a pattern of exploitation that the company enabled. I couldn't stay silent knowing this would continue if no one spoke up. By Friday morning, Meridian Pharmaceutical had announced Harold's termination for violations of company policy and professional standards. Their stock had initially dropped 4%, but stabilized after the announcement. The legal team was reportedly in crisis mode, trying to get ahead of potential lawsuits. Rebecca Clemens had filed her divorce papers, which were now public record. Atlanta's social media was buzzing with speculation. Apparently, Harold and Rebecca moved in wealthy circles, and the scandal was the talk of private schools and country clubs across Buckhead. And Tanya had been called into a marathon HR meeting Thursday morning. She wasn't fired, but the promotion to senior director was officially rescinded. She was being reassigned from Harold's team to a different department, effectively demoted. Her career trajectory at Meridian was finished. Everyone in the company knew how she'd gotten her promotions, and no amount of actual talent could overcome that reputation. 3 weeks after the divorce papers were filed, Tanya called and asked to meet. Not to reconcile, but to understand. They sat in a diner near the airport under fluorescent lights, and Tanya looked at Robert with eyes that had finally comprehended something fundamental. "You did this," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "The women. The reporters. The complaint. You coordinated all of it." "Yes." Tanya was quiet for a long time. She looked older than she had before the trip to Miami. Her hands shook slightly around her coffee cup. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said finally. "I wasn't. I was trying to build something. Harold said I had potential, that I could be his partner eventually, that we could build something real together. And I wanted to believe it so badly because I wanted to matter, because I wanted to matter more than just as your wife, and you always mattered," Robert said quietly. Tanya looked at him, and her face crumpled. "I know that now." By late December, the details had resolved themselves like debris settling after a storm. Harold was fired. His career in pharmaceuticals was effectively over. He moved out of the house Rebecca had decorated. He saw his children every other weekend in a small apartment in Cobb County. Rebecca got full custody in the house and a settlement that left Harold financially devastated but free. The promotion Tanya had been promised was rescinded. She was transferred to a different apartment, a lateral move that everyone understood was a demotion. Her professional reputation at Meridian was destroyed. Other pharmaceutical companies, having heard the story, wouldn't touch her. Tanya stayed through the end of the year, working quietly, accepting the judgment from colleagues who now knew exactly how she'd advanced. Then she accepted a position at Meridian's Boston office, a transfer that felt less like opportunity and more like exile. She moved out of the house and into an apartment near the airport while she prepared to leave Atlanta entirely. The divorce settlement gave Robert the house, alimony payments of $2,000 monthly for 18 months, and full coverage of legal fees. Tanya signed everything without much fight. She wanted this over. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to start again, somewhere where people didn't know this version of her story. Catherine called Robert 2 weeks before Christmas to confirm everything was finalized. "How are you doing?" she asked. "I'm functional," Robert said, and it was true. On a cold Saturday morning in late December, Robert sat in his living room surrounded by half-packed boxes. He wasn't moving. Tanya was. She'd asked to come by and collect the items that were hers, furniture she'd brought into the marriage, her clothes, her books. She arrived at 10 in the morning looking thinner than Robert remembered, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She'd cut her hair short, a dramatic change from the long waves she'd always worn. She looked older. She looked diminished. "Thank you for letting me come by," she said quietly, standing awkwardly in what used to be their shared living room. "The settlement says you can get your things," Robert said. "I'm not going to make it difficult." "That's not why I'm here," Tanya said. She wrapped her arms around herself. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. Not sorry I got caught. Sorry for what I did. For the lying, the cheating, the planning to screw you financially. All of it." Robert said nothing. He waited. "I've been seeing a therapist," Tanya continued. "Trying to figure out when I became the kind of person who could do what I did. And I still don't have a perfect answer. It started small. Harold paying attention to me, making me feel important and valued. Then it escalated so gradually that I didn't even realize how far I'd gone until it was too late to stop without destroying everything." "You had a choice at every step," Robert said. "I know," Tanya said. She was quiet for a moment. "The worst part is you were right about Harold. He dropped me the second things got complicated. All his promises about leaving Rebecca, about us being together, they were lies. He told his lawyers I seduced him, that I was obsessed and wouldn't leave him alone. He's throwing me under the bus completely to save his own reputation." "I'm sorry," Robert said, and he meant it. "That's another betrayal on top of everything else." Tanya looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I don't deserve your sympathy." "No," Robert said. "You don't. But I wanted you to understand something. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry anger anymore. But Tanya, we're not getting back together. That chapter is over. We both need to accept that and move forward." "I know," she said quietly. They stood in the living room in silence for a moment. At the walls where their pictures used to hang. At the couch where they'd watched countless movies together. at the window that looked out on the yard where they'd raked leaves together just weeks earlier. "Goodbye, Robert," she said finally. "I hope you find happiness." "You too," Robert said. "I hope Boston is a fresh start for you." She left, and Robert watched through the window as she loaded boxes in her car and drove away into a life that would never again intersect with his in any meaningful way. In the months that followed, Robert rebuilt his life piece by piece. He kept the house but made it his own. He painted the bedroom a color he'd always wanted. He bought new furniture. He converted Tanya's office into a reading room with bookshelves and a comfortable chair. He started dating again, cautiously at first, then with increasing openness to the possibility of connection. He joined a gym. He lost 15 pounds. He took up painting, discovering he had a natural talent for landscapes. He made new friends. He spent more time with his mother and his Aunt Helen, who sent him another card with money in it, even though he insisted she didn't need to. He told her she was the reason his life had changed course that November. She told him that sometimes the smallest acts of love cascade into consequences no one expects. By spring, Robert sat on his back porch on an evening when the azaleas were blooming, grading papers and drinking wine, feeling lighter than he had in months. A cardinal sang from the oak tree at the property line. The evening air was mild and carried the scent of honeysuckle. Robert had survived having his heart broken and his trust shattered. He had learned that revenge isn't about making others suffer, but about holding them accountable while maintaining your own integrity. He had learned that the best response to betrayal isn't rage or cruelty, but strategic action that protects yourself and others. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Jennifer Brooks texted him, "Mr. Williams, this is Jennifer. I wanted to thank you because you spoke up. I found my voice again. Because you held Harold accountable, I was able to get justice. I hope you're doing well. You're a good man." Robert smiled and typed back, "Thank you. I hope you're doing well too. We all deserve better than what happened." He set his phone down and looked out at his backyard. He had lost his marriage and had his trust violated and his life turned upside down. But he had gained something too: self-respect, integrity, the knowledge that he'd stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. He'd protected future victims. He'd held powerful people accountable. He'd refused to be silenced or diminished. The house was quiet. His life was his own again. And Robert Williams had learned, in most painful way possible, that sometimes justice and personal healing can coexist. Sometimes doing the right thing for others helps you heal yourself. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in response to betrayal is to make sure it means something beyond your own suffering. On his back porch on a spring evening, Robert I understood finally that the best revenge isn't revenge at all.